Hi, Misha here, and I really enjoy talking about the Belgian FAL and all of its variants. Also, often referred to as the right arm of the free world, because it's as close of an analog the West had to the Soviet AK-47 AKM as history has. They would produce 5 to 6 million FAL variants, a huge number, although still dwarfed by the AK. I like doing videos, and I've done a few, but I haven't had any guns recently, any new FALs to talk about. It's sad, makes me sad. But I did realize I've not really focused on this gun, at least not in a long time, and not given it its own video. And that just doesn't seem right. The Austrian STG.58. Majority built by Steyr, but the first were actually assembled under contract by FN of Herstal, Belgium. So we'll talk about what makes this different, and also about my kind of personal story, because this was my first FAL, at least that I owned. Not this exact gun, but one very much like it. And it was part of my introduction to the whole series. And I'll do my best to stay on topic and only talk about this one. Just as a starting off point, this is an original kit with original barrel. It's on an older DSA receiver. It's a Type 2. And it was assembled for me by a friend, Moose and Squirrel. That's not his username, but he'll know what that means. With that, let's talk about how this unique variant came to be. Israeli FAL. This is the earliest style of FAL that I own, although it's not really an early one. This is my Israeli SBL IMI Romat. It was imported in the 80s, but it was built over in Israel using older Israeli parts, which are kind of early FN styling. We'll get to it. Backing up, this is the FN49, sometimes known as the SAFN. This is the immediate progenitor of the FAL. The idea for a self-loading rifle at FNH really happened right before World War II, but because Nazis, work really could not get underway until 1946. And they already had concepts and even some early prototypes by 1947, and these were chambered for 8mm Kurs because, of course, the MP44. And from the outset, they wanted to do a pistol grip gun with detaching magazine. But to kind of get FN back on the market after Nazis, they released the FN49, taking orders in 1948. That's where this one comes from. This is an Egyptian 8mm contract gun built in Belgium. The Belgian military also ordered some of these in 30-06 because these predate 7.62 NATO 308 as a cartridge. They were self-loading. They had the potential to be select fire, but because they fed from a fixed 10-round mag, in reality they were semi-auto. They used a tilting or tipping bolt. They had a short stroke gas piston with an adjustable gas regulator, although it was buried under the handguard. And this front sight, especially the protector, is quite similar to what would be on the taller sight FALs. You know, it's just a progenitor. We can do a full video looking more at the FN49 if folks are interested. But this was kind of where they were about halfway through in 1949. But work would continue, and in 1951, the FAL, what would become the FAL, would meet the 30 caliber light rifle cartridge from the USA. Originally, they were going to do it in .280, a British round. The US got involved, and it was soon chambered for what would become 7.62 51 NATO. And finally, in 1953, FN introduced the FAL, the light automatic rifle, into its catalog. And late that year, Britain and Canada, along with Australia, expressed interest so they could retire their Enfields. Well, Canada was the first to officially adopt it in 1954, but Israel here was not far behind. In 1955, they placed their first orders, and they had a few of these by 1956 for their Suez Crisis. This is why the Israeli guns have a lot of early features, including wood furniture, tall sights, the older style of gas piston and plug. Now, the early Type A's actually had a full wood handguard, but notice it's just a bare muzzle with a lug here for a bayonet. The idea was that the flash hider was part of the bayonet, and you could also attach a grenade launcher. While I don't have shooting footage of the STG.58, let's show this one again, just because it's nice to have some action since we had it out last year. Why not? Israeli FAL. Interest in the new FN quickly kind of ran throughout Europe and even the world, and many countries purchased them, having many distinct designs, and FN was happy to accommodate. In 1955, they would send some to the West German Border Guard, what we know as BGS. They're quite interesting because their original ones were kind of all wood, but they would quickly evolve, and this would lead to the Gewehr 1 here. The order was placed in December of 1956, and the West German, the new Bundeswehr, the reformed military, for some reason they didn't want Germany to have a military for a while after World War II. They liked the FAL, but they wanted a few changes. And these metal handguards, pressed steel handguards, were one. Also this folding light bipod. And they went to the newest pattern of wood stock. But the two most important things, first off, they did go to a few internal changes, like an improved firing pin and an improved extractor. But externally, which is easier to see, they went to the shorter rear sight and shorter front sight. There's a lot of advantages to this. It gives your soldier aiming the gun a lower profile himself. It also has the sights closer to the bore axis, and they're just less likely to get knocked and damaged. It was a good idea. This is why most later metric FALs followed the pattern. And another one was this new system for the muzzle. They took the lug on the barrel here, which is meant for a bayonet, flash hider, or grenade launcher, separate attachments. They relocated it, and they went to a QD flash hider, or QD system. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And it even has a secondary lug under it here, so in theory, it could mount a bayonet. This was actually based off the T.58 style, or the Type B style flash hider, but that's a story for another day. So this is what West Germany ordered as the G1, and they were quickly delivered in 1957 and 1958, getting about 100,000. But they would never produce them in Germany, because hell if FN was going to let that happen. But Austria, that was a different story. Following World War II, the Austrian military, well, the whole nation of Austria was in an interesting position politically. In fact, they couldn't even decide if they were a victim of the Nazis or willing collaborators. It's a whole thing. And at one point, they even were talking about splitting it up with zones of occupation. But in the end, Austria was left to its own devices, expected to remain neutral. But the changing politics meant that by the mid-50s, they really needed to improve and modernize the Bundesheer, their Austrian Federal Army, and adopt a modern rifle. So in 1956, they started looking at what was available, and by this point, they're very much in the Western camp, and very soon the Soviets would kind of give up all claim. And they were looking at what was coming out of Spain with the SEPMI. They looked to the USA to see what was going on over there, the M14 and soon the AR-10. And of course they looked at the FAL. And so they really wanted to get some prototypes of each, and they wanted to do some customization to meet their needs. For the FAL, what we know as the metric, they started with the G1. It was the latest and greatest. They pretty much took all of its adaptations for their gun. But for the wood stock, they did away with this hump. They're going to more of a straight stock. They thought that worked better with the low sights. They also wanted a new rear sling swivel. This one is more of a standard swivel. They wanted to go to one with full rotation. And they wanted a rubber butt plate instead of a steel butt plate. They more or less copied the carry handle and more or less copied the steel handguards. There are minor differences between G1 and STG.58 handguards, but they don't. It's just the different style of pressing, basically. If you look here at the hole here, look at this hole, those little things like that. They kept the same front sight, and the bipod is nearly the same. They did change it a wee bit. On the G1, these screws just come through, and there are spring-loaded plungers that lock them into detents. For this version, these screws would be staked with castle nuts on the inner surface, and the bipod was given rollers to more smoothly move and just not wear as much. That makes sense. If you have them side by side, you can really tell. But the biggest and most noticeable change is with the muzzle device. Just as the Germans went to their QD system, where they could use one of several devices. I've got them here. Here's another flash hider. This one actually has the spring lock in it. Here is the grenade launcher. And here is the blank fire device. So they would carry 2 spare devices plus one on the gun. And they would just twist it a quarter turn to take it on and off. Not a bad notion, perhaps, but the Austrians had a better idea. Or rather, Major, later Colonel Stoll had this idea here, which is why this device is named the Stoll flash hider, or Stoll combination device. Now, Major Stoll was the leader of the purchasing committee, basically the committee looking at things, so this is an adaptation he kind of spearheaded. It does all of these things. It works as a flash hider and a grenade launcher, all in one. It takes standard 22mm grenades. Open-ended 4 prongs work as a flash hider. For a blank fire device, like we have here, it's actually internally threaded, where you simply screw an adapter in for training. And finally, it's open-ended, so that it can be used as a wire cutter for fencing and such. Just stick the wires through, and as you know, twist and fire. Now, I've heard some people say this device is big and clunky looking. It's really not, because it doesn't screw onto the barrel back here. It actually screws on up here and slides back over the barrel going rear. So it doesn't really add much in the way of length or anything. In fact, just like most other FALs, this has a 21-inch barrel. Overall length is about 43 inches. And weight unloaded is about 9.8 to 9.9 pounds. Weight loaded with one full magazine is about 11.25 pounds. My G1 here has the metal, the alloy cocking handle. Most, if not all, production STG.58s have the polymer one. Pretty much the same plastic polymer pistol grip. It should be said that the original ones had wood stocks. We'll talk about the polymer one in a minute. It has the vertical takedown latch, same. 3-position selector, full, semi, and safe. Standard controls, folding, cocking handle, obviously carry handle, excuse me. Now, another important change with the German version, like most, there's this plug here. You would use a bullet tip to rotate it. If you rotate it different directions, over here, that's gas is cut off. If you move it around here, notice how it is. If you move it down here, it's for disassembly. Gas piston. By the way, this has a very finely adjustable gas regulator with 13 to 14 positions. It's meant to adjust for your either climate, elevation, or ammo, and then leave be. It's not meant to be adjusted on the fly. Anywho, the Austrians added this L-shaped piece so that it could easily be adjusted to shut the gas off by hand. Also, so you would not go the other direction and accidentally put it in the takedown position. This was because anti-tank grenades were quite important for the doctrine at the time because of Russian armor. Now, if you do want to adjust this, go ahead and flip it over to the grenade position, and then go ahead and rotate it further. There you go. So you had to keep pushing it in. Still easy enough to take off for cleaning, but you're not going to accidentally do it. Of course, this is a short stroke spring-loaded gas piston. It uses the same tilting or tipping bolt as the FN49. It has a rat tail behind the bolt carrier, which goes into the stock. And there is one other notable change. On the G1, our gas tube is all the way across the top under our handguard. And it's more or less free-floating, if that makes sense. It can easily be removed. Well, with the Sturmgewehr here, they went to a half-length gas tube, leaving the rear exposed, and the front was brazed. It's physically part of the gas block. In fact, yeah, let's take a look at that right now. Let's pull these handguards off. Let's take the handguards off quickly. Here's our barrel. A few different markings can appear, including original FN. You can have the Steyr aim point or bullseye logo. You can have the VCL 140 stamping. You can also have caliber, or rather cal with a K, 7.62. Here's that short gas tube I was talking about, with an exposed piston and spring back here. Pretty unique to the STG.58. Here's our handguards. The screw is captive, which is always a good idea. Like I said, they're just pressed steel. Actually very lightweight for what they are, not extremely thick, but the patterning kind of gives them a little more rigidity than you would think, plus the bipod folded up in them gives extra support. They're light, slim, and while they will heat up, there's at least a good amount of airflow between the handguard and the barrel, so they kind of act as their own heat shield. And there's a ring back here. By the way, if you're ever assembling one of these, make sure this ring is up here on the gas block, because if you go to all the trouble of screwing your barrel in and then realize you've left off the handguard retainer, you either have to unscrew your barrel or unpin your gas block. And in the case of a G1 or an STG.58, you also have to unstake these screws and remove the bipod. In other words, it's a big pain in the ass. So pro tip, if you're putting one together, tie this to the front or tape it to the front so you don't accidentally drop it, because you will need the retainer. Yep. There's the socket for that. And again, this is permanently attached to the gas block, unique to this Austrian model. I don't think it's giving anything away. I don't think there needs to be a spoiler warning to say that in 1958, after trials, the modified FN metric style was selected by Austria, being formally adopted as the Sturmgewehr 58, STG.58. This finally allowed them to retire a lot of old, frankly decrepit guns. And it went up against in trials the latest version of the AR-10 from Armalite and the latest version of the Setme from Spain, known as the Model 1958, which was the same model that the HK-G3 was initially based on. They were not interested in playing with the M14. Initially, 20,000 would be built to Austrian specifications in Belgium by FN. This would give Steyr GmbH time to set up production for domestic licensing. FN would grant them full licensing to produce it for their own use. Austria never sought to export it or sell it commercially. I'm honestly not sure if this was part of the terms of the contract or just something they weren't interested in doing. Doesn't really matter. So the first 20,000 were built in Belgium, but to their specifications, and then after that, production would transition to Austria. Now the first year or two, the guns would be built with FN-made parts. In the beginning, most every part was FN-made. Later, most part would be Austrian-made. By 1961 or so, they were pretty much entirely Austrian parts. And a few more differences would pop up now. Most noticeably, this buttstock. Instead of making wood stocks, they would make it from this lightweight, but still durable black polymer. It scratches, but it's hard to break. It's quite flexible. Has that straight comb. Nice thick rubber recoil pad, fully rotating sling swivel. By the way, the sling they used on these was actually a modification based on the Car 98 sling. They also use these 2-cell black pebble grain pouches with the mags exposed on the top. Belt loops and kind of a D-ring. The mags made in Austria were just your standard metric 20 rounders. They never made a 30. Again, they had the metal handguards, the upgraded bipod, and of course the Stoll flash hider. The controls were pretty well standard mag release here. Like most FALs, it has a non-reciprocating cocking handle. It does not fold, and it does have a bolt hold open on the last round or empty mag with the release here. Easy to use. Not exactly what you'd call an ambidextrous gun though, and the trigger is fine. It's worth saying that the pistol grip is hollow, and it does not have the notch inside for the small cleaning kit to go in. It's just a hollow piece. The Austrians kept the cleaning kit in kind of a tobacco tin leather pouch type thing on their belt. So it wasn't hugely different. Oh, one other thing I should mention. Notice that while this device doubles as a flash hider, grenade launcher, wire cutter, even support for the blank fire device, it does not have a bayonet lug. The Austrian Bundesheer did not issue bayonets for their rifles, and so one was never even created for the STG.58, nor would one be created for the later STG.77, the AUG, the AUG, although a version that could clamp on the barrel would be created for export for the AUG. So, by the 1960s, this was in full production. As I've already mentioned, the Steyr-made barrels were hammer forged, but the Belgian contract barrels were just more traditional cut. The new rifle was well received in the Austrian army, and at its height, Steyr was producing up to 10,000 per year. Not a massive number, but enough to meet their needs. And production would continue for quite some time, at least into the late 70s, into the early 80s. Now, like I said, this gun is assembled on a Type 2 receiver. Most, certainly your earliest ones, were all on Type 1. FN introduced the Type 2 cut in the early 60s to reinforce this problem area for guns that were being fired in full auto. And Steyr would make some guns on Type 2. It seems like they did both Type 1 and Type 2 in the 60s. Why? I don't know. They even did some late in production on Type 3s. FN would introduce the slab side receiver in 1973, so some of the last Steyr guns would come with those. Steyr would also, of course, make replacement parts, barrels, receivers, what have you. But of course, production would end when the AUG came around. The gun was well received for being easy to use, dependable. Keep in mind, they're not fighting in the sands. They're in Central Europe. And it was known for accuracy in Austria. Now, that brings us to the barrel. We know that they were hammer forged by Steyr, but there's a debate about chrome lining. The earliest barrels were not chromed at all. Many claim that Steyr would begin chrome plating the chamber, and some claim that late production barrels also have a chrome bore. Others claim this is nonsense, that a Steyr barrel was never chromed. I don't know. Many of these kits have come in. Many people have spent a lot of time with them. It's possible that some are chromed and just we're not aware of it. It's also possible that the quality of the barrel is just so high that it looks shiny and chromed. I'm not sure. I can say that the flash hider is attached using standard FN metric threads, unlike the G1. I think they're 9/16 by 24 and they are left hand, so it's interchangeable. It's also worth pointing out that after Austria would develop the Stoll flash hider, FN would kind of do something similar with their barrel style round flash hider that has the ports. It also has internal threading for the blank fire device. It can fire 22mm rifle grenades. It does not act as a wire cutter, but on the other hand, it does support the tubular, the socket type bayonet. So I think FN recognized that was a good idea. A few other contract guns would use the metal handguard and bipod arrangement as well. This might look awkward, but actually the handguards and the bipod are probably lighter weight than you might think. And even though this bipod is not adjustable, it's perfectly fine for plunking your rifle into dirt or snow. And you can also use it as kind of a de facto vertical foregrip, especially if your handguard is way too damn hot. And thanks to the adjustable gas system, recoil can be made quite tame. You can really make sure it's not overgassed. The sights, well, since the rear is mounted on the lower, and since the front's mounted on the barrel, there is potential for some drift, especially if the upper and the lower aren't fitted together nicely. But my friend who assembled this didn't make that mistake. He got them together good. Even though this is not a matching numbers kit, it feels good. It's tight. It has the original barrel. It's on the kind of receiver I wanted, because I don't have any other Type 2s in the collection. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes we just like a gun and we don't really have a great reason why. Well, with that, let's move on and talk about the end of this gun and semi-autos in the USA. Regardless of details about who made the barrel, how it's marked, even the finish, it's hard to find people that can agree what was original finish, what was used. Kits have been observed with phosphated finish, blued finish, even a paint over phosphate finish. And like I said, receiver types could be Type 1, which is probably the most common, Type 2, and Type 3 with very high serial numbers. We're talking over 160, 170,000. We don't even know for sure how many were built. In the 60s, Steyr was cranking these out about 8 to 10,000 a year. And they would continue production right up until starting AUG production. And it seems like the last rifles left the factory in the very early 80s. They were probably using up leftover parts. It was standard for the Bundesheer, but it was never exported, never attempted to be sold. This was built exclusively for the Austrian military. There might have been some police users, that kind of thing, but that's really it. There also was not ever a semi-automatic only version that Steyr turned out. However, there are reports, probably again for police use, of some having their triggers limited to safe or semi. But they still would have had the out-of-battery safety, what's often known as the sear, in them. So not a lot of variation there. They never would do, for example, a folding stock model or a carbine short barrel model. It was pretty much all this, and they had a very high degree of fit and finish from Steyr. Even after the AUG was officially adopted, units only started to transition over in 1979, but it would actually be into the mid and even late 80s before all active units in Austria would turn in their STG.58s and trade them for STG.77s. Even after that, some would be kept around for training, reservist, or even drill purpose. And there's even rumors that even in the 21st century, quite a few are kept around for that, or just ceremonial duties, because it is a very stately rifle. They really liked its accuracy and hitting power, It was quite dependable. Keep in mind, unlike Israel, this was not being used in the sand, dust, and dirt. For Central Europe as a defensive gun, because these were never used in warfare, it was a great gun. And of course, Austria had a volunteer, professional type army, not conscripts fighting in a jungle. My point is, it probably would have sucked in Vietnam, but it did very well for Austria at that day and time. So there were many that lamented its passing, but the AUG has proven quite a worthy successor. Either way, by the 1990s, in Austria, the FAL story was very much winding down, essentially completely over. But that's actually how the STG story really got going in the USA. And also why I like this gun so much, why I think a DSA receiver is as good as it gets for one of these, and why I keep this gun when others have come along. Let's end by talking about that. Many have labeled the FN-FAL as the right arm of the free world. That's because a lot were produced. It was the only thing that was kind of there to rival the AK. They produced 5 to 6 million, so far fewer than an AK, but they were used by so many nations. It was what the West had. Much like the AK, it wasn't perfect, but it was highly iconic. And lots of parts kits started to come in the 1990s. Now, before that, we had semi-automatic imports from FN. We had them from Imbel, FMAP. Even that Israeli gun you saw at the beginning was built by SBL using IMI parts. So we had complete guns, but the kits really started to flow in the 90s. First, we got inch pattern kits, L1A1. Then we started to get metric, including STG.58 kits. These started to appear in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were awesome kits. They had original barrels, usually in great shape. They were complete, and usually having the barrel still in the front stub of the receiver. And generally speaking, the only wear and tear you would find would be on the furniture. Some scratches on the buttstock, some to the rubber, some dings and dents to these metal hand guards, maybe a small amount of erosion from shooting, but all in all, because Austria had never fought a war with these, and these were only just basically used for training and service, they were in great shape. Some were matching, some were not, and some were force matched. This is not a matching kit, but I really like this gun, so I've just kind of kept it. It's smooth, it's well put together, a friend assembled it, and it's on a DSA receiver, which is the best option available considering there was never a semi-automatic built by Steyr themselves, which is a little funny considering they were sending AUGs over in the 80s, and they had leftover parts for the STG.58. You'd almost think they would have built some autos to send over here, because all you have to do is change the receiver a little bit. It's actually okay to have the same lower. That's why this one still has the 3 positions. That's okay under the law. But they didn't. But then we did kind of get lucky. DSA entered the scene. First, they started off as an importer, bringing over parts kits, accessories, things like that. But then, in the 90s, Steyr GmbH was looking to sell off pretty much everything. The production line, the tools, the blueprints, lots of leftover material, parts, drawings, everything. And DSA, purchased all of this. They said 40 tons of stuff, plus machines, all the correct drawings and specs, and they established a factory to build guns in the USA. So they're using Steyr specs, which Steyr obtained and perfected from FN. And this is when the SA-58 from DS Arms comes on the scene. We first hear about it around 1997. And it's, at least that early version, probably the best US-built FN-FAL type. DSA had a lot of Austrian parts, as you would imagine. They also ended up acquiring a lot of Belgian parts, mostly metric stuff, at any rate. So a lot of their early guns were built with a mix of what they made and excellent condition surplus stuff. But of course, the heart was the receiver. They used CNC tooling to machine to forge an actual receiver, not a casting. They originally did Type 1 and Type 2. Later, they would introduce a Type 3. They did versions with and without carry handle cuts. And early on, they were actually machined for DSA by LMT. Later, this partnership would dissolve, but yeah. So they were in-spec made metric receivers. And this is why a lot of us would just buy the receivers and use them to build up the existing parts kits. Since you can't get a Steyr semi-auto receiver, this really is the next best thing because it's built with Steyr tooling and Steyr specifications. So essentially it's an Austrian receiver made in the USA, at least the earlier ones were. So if you put a parts kit on it, yeah, that's pretty great. In fact, DSA even offered a version they called the STG.58 that they intentionally built with as many Austrian parts as they could. It had the Stoll flash hider, it had the bipod, the handguards, had the Austrian style buttstock. For 922R compliance, they usually did like pistol grip, trigger group, receiver, gas piston, and barrel. Yeah, AK guys, if you think trying to find 5 to 6 parts is annoying, FAL guys need to find 7. Of course, later DSA would start making magazines here once all the cheap FAL mags started to dry up. But the DSA mags were a little iffy and still are. In fact, from that range footage last year with the Israeli gun, which is a pre-ban, this happened. Israeli FAL.
And I hang up on the loading ramp. Those are mag issues.
Yeah, those are DSA mag. That's a DSA mag. So yeah, DSA magazines have a bit of a dubious reputation. They look good, but they fit tight, and they can have some feed issues due to angles and geometries and what have yous. DSA is of course still in business, but they've long since run out of most of their STG.58 parts. And they've even switched from forged receivers to investment casting, which is not inherently by itself a bad thing, but something that a lot of people kind of aren't happy with. But I just like this gun. It's not a matching gun, but this is how the kits came in. On these, the numbered parts would be barrel, receivers, typically sometimes just lower, sometimes the upper and the lower, bolt and bolt carrier. But all of your metric FAL stuff will interchange. Like I said, the first 20,000 or so STG.58s were built by FN. After that, Steyr would build between 150 and 155,000, bringing a total to 170 to 175,000 over just over a 20-year, 2-decade production run. But that was really it. It might seem like a small number, but since so many of them were in great shape, they were pretty common parts kits, kind of the highest quality metric one you could find in the USA 20 years ago, and that's why my first kit build, at least for a metric, was one of these. There's still, like I said, a lot of mystery about these, especially when it comes to the barrel and original fit and finish, that kind of thing. But I think everyone agrees it's a damn good gun regardless, with cool accessories and whatnot, and just a part of that old battle rifle history. So I thought we would talk about it today. Sorry again, I don't have any shooting footage of this gun. We actually took it out this year, but because we had so many guns and other things going on, it never came out of the case. It runs very well. It's a very nice, smooth gun. The triggers are military triggers on these. The only real issue, because your rear sight is based on your lower and your front sight is on your barrel, which is attached to your upper, and they are a hinged unit, you're not going to get DMR sniper accuracy out of the iron sights. You're going to get military accuracy, but that's okay, because if a gun's put together right, they fit together quite tightly. And of course your recoil systems in your buttstock. But yeah, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear about your own STG.58 builds or DSA receiver builds. When it comes to US receivers, the DSA is, at least the original forged ones, are pretty much the only one I would go with. Kunins are alright. Hess, I don't need that kind of a headache in my life. There's a few others like the Enterprise, but I just think for an STG.58, or a G1 for that matter, the DSA receiver makes the most sense. It's the most legitimate one we have. So, just wanted to do an FAL video, and this one hasn't been out in a while. So, here it is. Hope you enjoyed it. If you could, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please feel free to check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.